In this video, we're going to be taking a look at estimating fraction sums and differences. Sums deals with addition, differences will be dealing with subtraction. And the essential question that we are going to be asking ourselves and answering is how can you make reasonable estimates of fraction sums and differences? Now you will need to have your Go Math books out and turn to page 251, and you also need your math journal and pencil out. Now let's take a look at the unlocking the problem on page 251, and it reads, Kimberly will be riding her bike to school this year. The distance from her house to the end of the street is 1/6 of a mile. The distance from the end of the street to the school is 3/8 of a mile. About how far is Kimberly's house from school? Now, one way that we can estimate fractions is by using a number line. Okay, and what we do with that number line, we think about the benchmark fractions to find reasonable estimates by rounding fractions to 0, 1/2, or 1. Now, what I mean by benchmark fractions, these are the fractions, or these are the estimates that you would say, that are pretty common. So 1/2 would be considered a benchmark fraction. On this number line, 1 would be a whole number, and 0. So we're thinking about 0, 1/2, or 1. Okay, so what we do, taking a look at this, we place a point at 1/6 on the number line. So that's the first thing that we would do. So 1/6. And we think about our benchmark fractions. Okay, and I do want you to place that point right there, right where I did on page 251. And it's important to think about, okay, the fraction is between 0 and 1/2. All right, so this is our thought process. Now, we know that it's between 0 and 1/2. Now, we need to figure out the fraction 1/6 is closer to the benchmark of 0. How do we know that? We just look at our number line. It's only 1/6 away from the 0. Okay, and 1/2/6 away from the 1/2. So the fraction 1/6 is closer to the benchmark 0. And so what we will do is round that 1/6 to 0. Now, using this number line, thinking of the benchmarks of 0, 1/2, and 1, we need to place 3/8 on the number line. So we put it on the number line just like that. We can see that this fraction, once again, just like the 1/6, is between 0, the benchmark 0, and also 1/2. Okay, so the fraction 3/8 is closer to the benchmark 1/2. We can see very easily it's only 1/8 away from that 1/2 benchmark. Okay, so it's closer to the 1/2, and what we will do, we will round that 3/8 to 1/2. Now from here, what we will do, step 3, we're going to add the rounded fractions. Pretty simple now. 1/6 is rounded to 0. 3/8 was rounded to 1/2. Now we have 0 plus 1/2 is going to give us 1/2. Is that the exact answer? No, this is an estimate. Okay, so Kimberly's house is about 1/2 mile from school. So we can see a way to round the fractions by using a number line, thinking of those benchmarks of 0, 1/2, and 1, and then rounding accordingly. Okay, now another way that you can do this is by using mental math. Now what you can do, you can compare the numerator, remember, is that top number, and the denominator, which is the bottom number on a fraction, to round a fraction and find a reasonable estimate. Okay, and what I mean by that, let's take a look at 9/10. So what we need to do is we look at that numerator and denominator, and we see that that numerator and denominator is about the same. Okay, it's only 1 off. Okay, so what we could do is we can round that 9/10 to 1. Why can we round that 9/10 to 1? Because remember, 10 over 10, whenever the numerator and denominator are equal, that does equal 1. Even if it's 1,000,000 over 1,000,000, that still just equals 1. Okay, now we take a look at that 5/8, and we think about this. The numerator is about half the denominator. So half of 8 is 4, and 5 is only 1 off of 4. Okay, now remember, this is just estimating. Okay, so we can change that 5/8 to 1/2. All right, now we can see from here, step 3, we can subtract. So we have all of our rounded fractions. 9/10 is rounded to 1. 5/8 is rounded to 1/2. So we have 1 minus 1/2 is going to give us 1/2. Is that the exact answer? No, it's not. It's just an estimate. Okay, so 9/10 minus 5/8 is about 1/2. Okay, so taking a look at that numerator and denominator, comparing them, thinking about your benchmark fractions or your benchmark 0, 1/2, and 1 will be very helpful whenever you don't have access to a number line. Okay, so let's take a look at these other ones. We have 2 7/8 minus 2 1/2. Now, thinking about what we just did, okay, comparing the numerator and denominator, and I do understand that these are mixed numbers. So we see that 7 and the 8. Okay, that's close to the same. Okay, the 7 is very close to the 8, so we can make that into a 1, adding that to that 2. Okay, making it a 3. All right, and then we also see that, okay, and I changed that to 2/5 because that's what it is in your book. So that 2/5, we know that 2 is very close to a 5. I'm sorry, close to half of the 5, so we're going to round that to 1/2. Okay, so now we have 3 minus 1/2 is about 2.5. Okay, so let's take a look at that next one. We have 1 8/9. Now that 8 is very close to a 9. So what we can do, remember, whenever the numerator and denominator are equal, that does equal 1. So we'll just add that 1 to the other whole number that we have, making that a 2. And we have 4 8/10. Now that 8/10, that 8 is very close to a 10, so we can make that, round that fraction to a 1. Regrouping, making that 4 into a 5, and we can add both of these together. So 2 plus 5 is about 7. Okay, now thinking about the process that we went over as far as rounding it to the closest benchmark, we have 5/6 plus 3/8. We're going to do this together. Okay, so thinking about on a number line 5/6, we know that it is very close to the benchmark of 1. Why do we know that? Because we know that the 5 is very close to a 6. It's only 1 off of the 6, so close to the 1. Now 3/8, round 3/8 to its closest benchmark. That's going to be 1/2. Okay, now we take our rounded fractions. 1 plus 1/2 is going to equal 1 1/2. Now I want you to complete these 2 problems at your seat all by yourself. You can either use the number line like we did, or compare the numerator and denominator with each other. When you're finished, you can press play and I will have the answers for you. So pause the video now. Okay, here are the answers. We have 1/2 for this one and 1 for the second one. You can see what I rounded each fraction to. Now I want you to work through these 2 problems. When you're finished, you can press play and I will have the answer for you. So pause the video now. Okay, here are the 2 answers for you. We see 9/10. I rounded that to the 1, the 1/2. I did not need to round it anywhere because it was already 1/2. And that should actually not be 1. That should actually be 1/2. My mistake there. So that should be 1/2. Okay, I'll just put, there we go, just like that. Okay, now we have 1 minus 1/2 over here is going to give me 1/2. Okay, so 1/2 for both of your answers. Okay, work through these 2 problems. When you're finished, you can press play and I will have the answers for you. So pause the video now. Okay, here are the 2 answers. We have 0, 1/7 was rounded to 0, 8/9 rounded to 1, giving us 1. 3 5/12 rounded to a 1/2 because that 5 is close to being half of that 12. 3 1/10 was rounded to 3 because that 1/10 is close to 0. So 3 1/2 minus 3 equals 1/2. Okay, finishing this up, what I want you to do is complete this test prep problem. When you're finished, you can press play and I will have the answer for you. So pause the video now. Okay, the answer is letter B. And going over to The essential question: how can you make reasonable estimates of fractions, sums, and differences? You can see the answer. You can round the fractions using benchmarks of 0, 1/2, and 1 on a number line, or you can compare the numerator to the denominator and round the fractions to 0, 1/2, or 1. Then you add or subtract the rounded numbers. So this concludes the video on estimating fractions, sums, and differences. If you have any questions about this concept, please come and see me.